Thank you. We get started. So this is the final session of the day. Advocacy and Future of Early Detection, a groundbreaking model driving a comprehensive service for the two leading causes of death. You can see there's been a bit of change in this session. Unfortunately, two people who were supposed to be here were unable to make it, Catherine Grimes and Lori Fenton. But fortunately, we have Anita McGlothlin is going to primarily moderate this, and we have a wonderful panel of participants who will introduce themselves, and we'll get started.
I'm Anita McGlothlin with Go-To for Lung Cancer. I wanted to open up before introducing the panelists and talk a little bit about what Go-To is currently doing in this space. We're working on identifying pathways for a combined screening approach for heart and lung and women's health. And we're working to develop a draft framework to leverage lung cancer screening and developing a broader national framework for preventive services and address health equity. So we're strategizing, we're collaborating, we're really in, and we're in planning phases that's underway, which dovetails nicely with the federal legislative efforts. Also, that is a priority from Go-To. It's with the Women in Lung Cancer Research and Preventive Service Act that would expand resources to understand the science of lung cancer in women. Go-To has spoken at a number of conferences. Lori, who was unable to make it today, she's previously a keynote at the National Lung Cancer Roundtable last year, and she talked about policy and advocacy. And she was underscoring the complexity of healthcare policy, its impact on people's lives, and the federal funding or funding necessary for research, coverage, and reimbursement, and the regulatory landscape. This particular panel session will be interactive discussion among our speakers. They'll be addressing four key kind of buckets. Advocacy and policy. We would like to hear perspectives from both the lung screening side and also cardiovascular side. Evidence and research accelerators regarding economic data and reports and pathways to reimbursement. This would also address or include health equity, so gender-based research, vulnerable populations for both lung and heart. Obstacles and challenges is the fourth section that we would also, or third section, we would also be looking at, and how advocacy and policy can address and accelerate a public health strategy to improve health outcomes for the top two causes of death: heart disease and lung cancer. So I will start with Dr. Naghavi. I guess before I do that, could I ask everyone to introduce yourselves? Yes, that would be great, Beth.
Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Garner. I'm a women's health physician by training, specifically a GYN oncologist, so I am not an expert in lung or heart or radiology, mind you. I'm actually here today replacing Lori. Why am I blanking? There's so many Loris we've been talking about. Lori Frank
Yes.
From the RAND Corporation, who is now working with WHAM, which is an organization I'll be talking about today. I have some notes because I was just asked to do this a few days ago, so I've been gathering up thoughts. So I will be looking down at my notes, so forgive me for that. But I'm super excited. I don't actually practice medicine anymore. I've been in the industry for about 16 years, all in women's health, all in pretty much the pharma industry. So happy to be here.
Great. So Morteza Naghavi, I started SHAPE. It started as screening for heart attack prevention and education, SHAPE 2004. We issued SHAPE guidelines 2005. The organization that I started, the name of the organization was Association for the Eradication of Heart Attack, I-ELCAP. Once the SHAPE guideline came out, we were famous for SHAPE, and then we felt like, it's like Kleenex. You just change the products to the company's name. So we became SHAPE and changed the I-ELCAP to Society for Heart Attack Prevention and Eradication. And that became the advocacy group to promote awareness on calcium scoring. The SHAPE guideline was published finally in 2006. We had difficulties to get publication out. And then from 2006 till 2018 November, which SHAPE guideline was accepted into national guidelines. We held over 15 meetings like I-ELCAP, a satellite event, satellite SHAPE symposium during American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology annual meetings. And then after that, my mission has been focusing on getting it covered by insurance since 2019, as you saw. Hopefully by this year, this time next year, we will have the good news that we reached that goal of national coverage for calcium scoring.
Hi, I'm Bruce Pyenson. I'm an actuary here in New York and recently retired from Milliman, where I spent 37 years consulting to just about every aspect of the healthcare system. I've been involved in the payer financial aspects and mortality aspects, lung screening since about 2009, working with I-ELCAP and others. We're really pleased to be with you today.
And hi, everyone. Thank you for sticking around for the last session on a Friday afternoon. I'm Lori Sakoda. I'm an epidemiologist in the Division of Research at Kaiser Permanente in Northern California. My research program centers largely on advancing evidence to improve effective and equitable care for lung cancer across the continuum, with a focus on screening and early detection.
So I'll begin with Dr. Naghavi. I was wanting your perspective from your foundation and your work with SHAPE and Reshape on how you are envisioning policy and advocacy playing a role for the future of screening for lung cancer and cardiovascular disease. How can lung cancer screening be leveraged for early detection of heart disease?
So as you know, the question was for the reason we held this conference. So there's a lot in that question in how to achieve that goal. I think we built a scientific foundation, so we have to start with that to build the science, the evidence that such a combination makes sense, and then start looking into barriers to adoption of such a thing. So our guidelines, I think, hopefully after this meeting, we will get all the brains that were participating in the discussions into the Reshape writing group, put it as a policy with the word policy that one of the colleagues here suggested that we should put in. And then from there, we'll look into the actual implementation, which requires more than just academicians. We need to get industry engaged and have them realize the opportunity to make money from saving lives. This is something that is rarely done in primary prevention. Most of the money goes to secondary prevention or tertiary prevention, which has a very limited bandwidth to improve outcomes. So hopefully after this meeting, we'll be able to build on the momentum that we created here.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I wanted to say is that from the very start of this meeting, there's been a sort of a general theme, and that is that we're trying to move away from the silos. We're trying to move away from we're doing lung cancer, and this is as the clinicians even, we're doing lung cancer and there's another group, because what we're seeing here is even at this meeting, there's been an enormous exchange of information between cardiology and the lung group that this hasn't happened before. I mean, everybody's been surprised, I think, at the separation. And so we're trying to figure out how to pull it together. I started the meeting off with this idea of the terminology even we use, incidental findings. You know, when I'm reading a lung scan, the coronaries are incidental. It's kind of crazy, really, to think of that as the incidental finding. We got to think of this in a much different way. And similarly, you know, from the clinicians to the insurers to the advocacy groups, which is where we're at now, they've been so siloed in a sense. Lung cancer advocacy advocates for lung cancer. No, they need to, this is a broader issue. How do we advocate more for health? I mean, sure, they've got to stay involved in the lung cancer domain, but they've got to be advocating overall health of the person. And I think that's what a lot of this conference is trying to promote. How do we collaborate, work together on a much more holistic approach to the way we treat people and screening for these kind of illnesses. I mean, you might even think tobacco-related illness might be one way of thinking of it, but in general, this is a really overall health, what we're looking for. So
Yeah, that sets us up nicely for the next section regarding research accelerators or evidence and economic data reports and pathways to reimbursement. So I'd like to ask Beth Garner for her input on a couple of questions, and Bruce Pyenson too, to weigh in. I'll start with a couple. I guess it's a question to both of you. With the RAND and WHAM reports around economic and productivity investments and benefits, what were your findings? Is there something we can learn from those cost benefit analysis for both? I know there were separate reports, one done for women and lung cancer, and then a separate one that was done for women and cardiovascular disease. So I'm going to ask the same question to Bruce, but with his expertise from Millman's as an actuary. But Beth, start with you first.
Sure, thanks so much. And I could not agree more. You've already used some of the words that I've been thinking about: de-siloing, holistic care, et cetera, et cetera. So I can't wait to get to that part of the discussion. But so I also first want to say, so congratulations to the scientists who kind of figured this out. Like, we can use a single low dose CT scan to, to uncover and to find early diagnosis, not just for one disease or even two, maybe more than that. So that for me is super exciting. Preventive care is terribly fragmented, as you've already heard. So before I share the findings specifically from the WHAM report, I just want to give you a little bit of background. First, the reports that I'm going to be talking about today are 100% focused on women. Okay, so that's not to exclude men, and we can certainly do these types of analyses in men and men and women together, and all sorts of, for various populations. But the reason this was focused on women is that the women who came up with this idea were a number of actually business women who had sort of come to realize that women's health has been significantly underinvested in for many, many years in several areas. There are conditions obviously that only women experience, things like pregnancy or preeclampsia and things like that. But there are also many conditions that women experience, but experience differently from men, or experience disproportionately than men. And this is the area that they were most interested in. Why is it that certain diseases are more prevalent in women or show up in a different way for women? So this was kind of the beginnings of what we're calling the WHAM report. So these women came together. They actually started a nonprofit called WHAM, which is Women's Health Access Matters. So the word access is important in there. And they decided to focus on, prevalent diseases, the types of diseases that I just talked about that affect women differently and so on. And they decided to really go for sort of the big ones, right? So there are actually 4 reports altogether, right? And they chose cardiovascular disease. They chose brain disease, and they also chose autoimmune disease and lung, interestingly enough. And then within those therapeutic areas, they chose very specific things: heart attack, and for us today, it's lung cancer specifically. And then went about doing these reports, right? And so this was a ton of work, and I'm incredibly amazed by what they did. I am now part of WHAM, but I was not part of these amazing reports, these amazing studies that were done. So WHAM's premise, the whole premise here was that if there's more investment made in women's health research, women would benefit, right, from sex-specific prevention strategies, diagnoses, and treatments that reduce their burden of disease and thus improve well-being and hence the well-being of society. And I say society because if you think about when we get to the findings, you will find that actually societal impacts are tremendous, even with a fairly small investment in women's health research. So WHAM, of course, these were business women. They didn't know necessarily how to go about this, so they commissioned the RAND Corporation to conduct a data-driven study. And this is where Lori Frank, who was supposed to be sitting here today, comes in because she did this work, okay? So if you have technical problems today, I probably won't be able to answer them in terms of the analyses that were done, but I can certainly provide to you the high level, of course. So the studies were intended to quantify the potential impact of increasing funding for women's health. And very specifically, what they chose was, we're going to double the current percentage of the NIH extramural portfolio devoted specifically to women's specific health. So it's not just women's conditions, keep that in mind. It's women with lung cancer, women with, and so on and so forth, okay? There was a method to this madness called microsimulation analysis, and then there's certain inputs that go in around certain assumptions, right, that were made. What was found after this incredible work was absolutely staggering, okay? The biggest, sort of the top line result that we talk about the most is the effect on the economy, if you can believe it. Now, obviously, there were incredible effects that were seen around, health outcomes related, quality of life, societal gains, and even workplace productivity. But really, that top line result was that investing $350 million, that was like basically doubling, like I said, the NIH research for women budget, right? So $350 million to women's health research, that would generate $14 billion to our economy, all right? And that's over 10 to 20 to 25 years or so. So it takes time, but the amount of actual impact from a scientific medical standpoint was really quite small, actually. It was about, if we could succeed with that work, with that 350 million, to improve 0.1% in mortality and an incidence of 0.1% from a quality standpoint, we could achieve this, right? That large number, $14 billion for the economy. So what they understood, meaning the women who went after this project, was at the end of the day, it's all about economics, right? Especially when we're talking not really about the academics so much, but certainly industry. If you they want to know, what's my ROI? That's the first question, right? So we've got that ROI now. Now, of course, this is on a very high level. This is across 4 diseases. And as you said, there were 4 different ones. So that for lung cancer specifically, the statistic that I saw, at least from the report, was that, again, it's doubling the NIH investment in lung cancer research specifically would yield a return on investment of $1,200 just for every dollar. So these are big changes that can be made. And the whole point of this, right, is ultimately we want to advocate, right? So I'll leave that for the next session. But clearly, everybody in medicine should be very excited about this, despite the fact that it's done in women.
Thank you,
I'll stop there.
Beth. That's fantastic and really great information from the macroeconomics perspective. And Bruce, I would ask you to also take a.
Yeah, I would say asking an actuary to comment on economist work is perhaps, or vice versa, is perhaps like asking an orthopod their opinion of chiropractors, or an astronomer's opinion of an astrologer. But I would say the WHAM report is on lung cancer is actually very modest because it actually ignores screening as something to be done. That is, screening, as we all know here, cures most lung cancers, and their assumptions do not envision a cure. So the results are actually quite modest compared to what I think reality would be. I would say that, Mort has been through the rigors of demonstrating evidence for the FDA and so forth, and economists do not have the same view of evidence that the scientists have. So I think there's need to move from assumptions which were that we can improve mortality by 0.01 or 0.1 or 1%, the range of 2 orders of magnitude, which is what they modeled, to something much more concrete and financial. That said, I think it drastically underestimates what the impact would be of even simple lung cancer screening, let alone combined screening, because those would not move the dial by their baseline of 0.1%. It would be much, much bigger than that. We uh, heard yesterday, maybe it was you, Mort, that used the terms tsunami of tsunami. So you didn't use yeah, so this tsunami of lung cancer that's happening because of, the demographic shift. And I think that's something that we ought to be using. It's not just lung cancer, it's cardiovascular disease as well. To scare the heck out of people. That actually worked for hepatitis C. There was a tsunami of hepatitis C with a very strong peak incident year of 1953, but we have something like that going for combined lung and cardiovascular. I have one slide, and it'll take me a minute or two to talk through. So this is a timeline. On the bottom is some numbers of the cost of cancer by stage from a report in 2012. I apologize, that's SEER stage, and that was published in Health Affairs, and that's for commercial. These are annual costs of treating people back 2012, and the 2022 costs, somewhat different structure, but these are by let's see, stage 0, 1, 2, 3 combined, stage 3 and stage 4. And just to point out why the changes are, this was presented at I-ELCAP a couple of weeks ago. Look at the two blue red circles. The cost of treating for commercial insurance in the first year early stage hasn't changed very much, but the cost of treating late stage, the green circles, has grown for 142 some 50 to 312, 819 has grown enormously. The cost of screening, which is the biggest cost of any screening program, the actual low-dose CT, hasn't changed very much in 10 years. So the cost effectiveness of shifting people from late stage to early stage has improved dramatically. Now, all the cost effectiveness studies that I've seen are using old data, and and they're using Medicare data, and so I think there's, and frankly, modeling the impact of tagging on cardiac calcium score, other features to that would be relatively simple in the modeling, because it's not as complicated. You perhaps don't have the same kind of stage shift. You have an earlier diagnosis of treatment and avoidance of events. So I think that's for the future, but this hints at a important outcome financially. And I think the tsunami that we talked about, that's going to be key to getting the attention of the Medicare program and CDC.
Is the last one the 0 to 12, and then after that it comes down? Is it because a lot of them die?
These are actually a lot of them die. The costs come down because treatment stops when you die. Yeah, usually.
So it's a cost-effective approach. So that is not counted, right? The loss.
Well, life years would pick that up. That would be a different measure.
Yeah,
So
sure.
the 3-year costs assume people live to up 25.
That's really drastic. That slide is really amazing, and I think what she was saying.
But this is see a question. How do these costs compare to Netherlands?
I'm not exactly sure, but we did do an early health technology assessment for combined screening, which was, I don't think multi-target screening, if cost effectiveness has been done before. We found that adding coronary artery disease screening is very cost effective in terms of cost per quality. Emphysema screening is not, because it has very limited impact. So that has been published. I think, and maybe just to add to this, the balance between screening and stage 1, stage 4 will really be impacted by potential new indications for immunotherapy in low stage lung cancer. And then I think well, you could do the modeling, how that will affect the cost effectiveness.
Regarding your question about the costs in Europe, there was recently a report, HTA from the Belgium government, which analyzed exactly these numbers and found the same growth in Belgium. The absolute costs were in Belgium about a factor of 3 lower, so 1/3, which is in line with the relationship of healthcare costs in Europe compared to US, which are generally, as you know, in the US higher. So I think also the German costs would be factor of 3, so 1/3 of these costs, but the relationship between early stage and late stage is the same in other countries too. The absolute numbers are lower, but the relation is the same.
The cost of screening, the low-dose CT isn't that different, I believe, between the US and Europe.
The cost of actual test.
Yeah.
The cost of a low-dose CT. This is also quite different within Europe. So Germany, for example, is rather low. France is higher. So this is, but it's not a factor of 3 to the US. You are right. But generally, CT is relatively cheap. Surgery is reasonably priced. Any late-stage therapies are very expensive and also rapidly growing in cost. If you look at this over time, the costs continuously grow in the late stage because new drugs hit the market all the time, are released all the time, and of course prolong survival, but at a very high cost. This is a global tendency.
So Bruce and Beth, I had a couple of additional questions, kind of same in this key area around both the types of reports that have come out of Milliman and then also Wham and Rand. And if you see a role for these types of cost benefit analysis and economic reports that may help the case or to make that case, that business case, right, that it can be done and done more efficiently with cost effectiveness there. I'd like for you both to weigh in on that, but also translate this into the real implications around reimbursement and payers. And I know you have two hats on, Bruce, between your prior role with MacPac and also your actuary. So would love to get your opinions on pathways for reimbursement and some of the regulatory landscape too, and the impact of this type of report.
Pathway to reimbursement with modeling without actual outcome data?
This would just be talking about the cost benefit. That's right.
Just go ahead.
Yeah, those are all great questions. And you already touched on this, I think, around using these kinds of reports to, show the business, case, right, for just what you said, right, using a single CT for both lung and heart disease, and potentially other, right, I believe.
Yes,
other,
osteoporosis.
right, osteoporosis, I also think. Yes, but, so actually G, or GoTo, I should say, is talking to the RAND Foundation, I think that's okay for me to say, to do a similar report and do exactly this, right? To show the impact of dual imaging and potentially including other, like I said, other preventive measures using a single CT. And in lieu of doubling the NIH budget, which is what was done for the original WHAM reports, I think there are a number of ways one could think about going about this, right? So, I mean, I don't think we need to necessarily go into how you would do this, but for sure, it makes sense because when you can provide this, this kind of evidence,
Mhm.
right? Despite the fact that, yes, a lot of it is assumptions, I get that for sure. But that's going to allow us to do what we're going to talk about a little bit later around the advocacy, right?
Yeah.
And pushing for these changes.
This kind of is a question for maybe some of you in the audience. I'm curious how or if it's being currently paid and how for those who are performing both the lung cancer screening and the coronary artery calcium scoring. Many of you all in the past 2 days have talked about using technology and AI technology and incorporating that. In some conversations I've had with Dr. Kessler and Ella, and I don't know if you want to weigh in on this. I mean, there are I always look to what can we use as a reference, and there are established AI codes. There's proposed language for 2 new AI codes to be effective in calendar year 2025 around CTA. And then there's also a current code that's payable for CT optimization, tissue characterization, and that's based off of some of the research Uptellin has worked on. So those are 2 kind of areas that we could look at of how they've been impactful in the reimbursement pathway space for AI technology. And is that something we should look at or model after when approaching this question of how do we pay for? Yes. Either one.
This one's better. No, thank you. So, Anita, we've been looking at this for a while, as you know, in our quantitative imaging workshop with Richard Frank helping us. And, the problem is that the reimbursement driving the research is so frightening. The reimbursement that's now been approved that you just mentioned for a CCA is very expensive.
$950.50.
Yeah,
And Jim, they only pay $170 for doing the actual CTA.
really. That's exactly my point.
So I think
So-
what she has is a good point. That's what they did. They used the data and got a 900 with this analysis modeling. But CTA, what does it take? A tech, injection, and a radiation, scanner. So
yes.
they couldn't go more than 150 and all the liability.
Yeah.
But the AI guys used the model, used this economic presentation to CMS and got the $900. So that's a very important topic to dive in.
Okay, so I agree.
So
And if you let me finish, because what they're doing is a diagnostic test. It's not a screening test. And we want to develop AI for prevention for population-based application. And trying to get there from,
Except the argument I heard, Naghavi make yesterday during his presentation, or was that today? This was that they met with CMS and argued that it's not screening for their technology.
Yes,
It's diagnostic.
screening is dead on arrival. You do not have a second chance if you just tell CMS we're here for screening. So Jim, we have to change your vocabulary.
no, more, you don't. You have to listen what Bruce is telling you about where population health is going and who's the payer and what they're getting reimbursed for.
So I look at this like in 2 ways. You've got policy pathways when we're
Yeah.
talking about USPSTF and Medicare national coverage determinations and so on. Of course, that trickles down the USPSTF with the ACA and commercial payers, yes, on AB graded task force given recommendations. And then you have a second pathway when we're talking about dollars and cents, reimbursement, how much something costs, what process does it go through to get paid, what fee schedule is it payable, and so on, what methodology is used to get that reimbursed, what reference code is used, all of that. So there's different languages. One is on policy where there's a different language like the randomized clinical trial level of evidence around health outcomes. So things that task force is going to be looking for as well as CMS. And then you've got payment and reimbursement, which there's lots of avenues, right?
Yes. And we've been dissecting this for about 5 years. And I think we have to look at this through a different lens. And the reason for being, I've been involved in women's health for a long time. I was on the steering committee for the Women's Health Initiative 35 years ago, okay? And we designed the Women's Health Initiative. We had a much more comprehensive analysis because we were requested by politicians to do that. And that study was developed by an epidemiologist from the LBI and people from the Arthritis Institute and this,
Yep.
that, and the other thing. And it went forward. And what it said was, you're looking at diseases that have been underfunded for women that are chronic diseases, and you have to study them in women over the span in which these diseases develop. And the politicians got this. They came back and said, that's very well and good. But our constituency are women age 5th decade, 6th decade, and 7th decade of life, and that's who we're going to study. And so the front end of this analysis, this epidemiological analysis to get at the roots of cardiovascular disease and cancer in women was short-circuited by a political process. I'm not beating up on Barbara Mikulski and Karen Schroeder, Congressman Schroeder, for doing this. But the point is that we have a new opportunity. And to try to drive that through our
Yeah,
current
to get
reimbursement
to get there.
structures is not the way to get home.
Yeah,
Well,
so
Can I finish? What I believe we need to do is, instead of just going at this, women are going to do something, the VA is going to do something, African Americans are going to do something.
Oh.
We kind of have some shared issues around tools like AI that are going to be applied in a public health context. And to get equity and all this stuff, we've got to bring these needs together, and we need to educate some people about what the opportunities are using the data that we've been talking about in terms of cost, the cost impact, let alone the mortality and the quality impact. And we got to say, if you want all these white papers on equity of AI to be real, we have to go about this in a way that addresses the things that our experts have been telling us about AI for the last 10 years and coordinate all these special interest groups and all the smokers and everything else and try to do a real comprehensive public health directed development. And the
100
reimbursement could come through
Yeah.
population health funding that Bruce is talking about.
Beth, go ahead.
100% agree. I just want to say, I mean, I hope there wasn't a sort of a thought that, you know, we're up here just talking about women's health, et cetera. But because, like, absolutely, my answer to your question is we need to bring the entire ecosystem together, right? That's the only way this is going to be done. It is terribly, terribly complicated, as you have just described. But I do think, you know, without coming together, bringing, you know, payers, bringing physicians, bring academics, industry. They've done this in lung cancer. I'm talking from the therapeutics standpoint. If you think about what Richard Pastor has done in the FDA Center of Excellence, all of that, that's what I see having to happen here.
So, just to kind of close the loop on some of the policy pathways for the USPSTF and CMS, it sounds like Morton Naghavi is going to be following what CMS on the NCD side. I don't know where that's going to go. It's been slow to take with them. And then the task force, when I looked up for cardiovascular disease in CIC, it's currently being updated. It says update in progress, and it looks like they've closed the public comments, but that it was posted for that review back in April of this year. Currently, it has a grade I by the USPSTF for insufficient findings. So that's where we're at with that currently for those pathways. I wanted to move on to the next bucket, though, and get Lori Sakoda's input here and expertise. So I wanted to talk about health equity and gender-based research and the vulnerable populations. So I'd love for you to speak on that. I had a couple of questions embedded here, and it could either be for lung cancer or the cardiology space too. So Mort, if you have something to weigh in, Beth. So yeah, I'm interested in learning about the opportunities to advance health equity by combining early detection of these top two leading causes of death. And what are the opportunities here for such a screening combined effort? Why is it important to this population?
Sure. As we've heard, throughout this entire meeting is that I think it's actually a huge opportunity to integrate early detection and for lung cancer and cardiovascular disease. As we've heard from others, right, we know that lung cancer screening, so I'm coming from the lung cancer screening side here, that it's been underutilized. And we've also heard that a lot of the people who are eligible for screening are among the most vulnerable and marginalized in the population. And so we are not reaching the right population right now. And I would say through the work that I've done to identify barriers to lung cancer screening, specifically in the Asian American population, we reached out to that group in particular because cancer is actually the leading cause of death among that racial ethnic group compared to cardiovascular disease. But what we've heard, what we've learned, it's not, I thought going in, it would be things about culture, mistrust. It really isn't. It's a bigger communication problem, I would argue. Most have said, I didn't even know lung cancer screening existed. And so it's really a messaging issue, in my opinion. And also there's stigma attached to smoking. So I think Mort said yesterday, or maybe today, that the value of bundling it together is that you reduce the stigma associated with lung cancer. Because most people don't associate cardiovascular disease with stigma and smoking, even though it is a risk factor for that disease as well. And so I do think it's an opportunity to increase equity. The other barrier that we hear a lot is it's an issue of cost and time. And so if you can actually integrate it into one visit, you actually, at least for the patient, it becomes something that seems a little bit, they're more likely to engage. Now, the issue of cost is a huge thing because we hear like, oh, you know, what are the downstream costs going to be? I really may not be able to pay for it. Even in a system like mine, which is integrated and people are insured, there are people on high deductible plans. So this is a really concern. It's a huge concern for them. So it's kind of weighing the benefits and costs for this particular population and really educating them on screening and what it means.
I can just add that there was actual study done by Kim Williams in Chicago that showed the low-income and high-poverty population were less presented calcium score. In fact, the calcium score average offered in that area was $400, like twice as the other areas that were more affluent area in Chicago. And it demonstrated that there's a massive inequity in access and utilization of calcium scoring, which translate to, you know, the same for statin usage and statin adoption, and then cardiovascular outcomes. So we don't have a study, a solid study that we show when you bundle this. But I think working with Bruce and this, you know, reshaped group after this meeting, we have the opportunity to write it up and demonstrate scientifically that once you combine this, you can increase the implementation and utilization by reducing stigma, making it easier for them. And then once we have that opportunity, hopefully through ARPA-H, to do a pilot by bringing a mobile CT to your Walmart and Kroger's and Target parking lot, making it easy to get in and out in less than 7 minutes, then that's where we have the opportunity to make an impact on outcomes, because we already know you find lung cancer in early stages, you have better, almost near cure. You put people on statin, once they have atherosclerosis, you get outcomes. These are almost, you find people osteoporosis. That, by the way, that is the only one that has U.S. Preventive Task Force Services Class A recommendation and reimbursement. So that's why we put that as our first priority to get AI passed through FDA and got approval. So we have the first AI that reads through lung scan and calcium scan, osteoporosis, and reports a DEXA equivalent Z-score, T-score. So we adopt, you know, a policy. We publish this as a, you know, group. I think we have a chance to make that kind of reimbursement, you know, allocation that the guys in CCTA by applying, you know, computational modeling for CTFFR, they got 900. It was actually 2,000. They were running 900 and so on.
So we only have a couple of minutes left, but as this session was talking about how kind of the advocacy world kind of breaks down barriers. So we have a few advocacy organizations or other organizations here that I would like to see if this impacted or resonated with them. So I'm staring at Robert Smith. And I'm wondering how this might resonate, this conversation would resonate with ACS. Do they see a role in terms of what we're talking about with cardiac disease and lung screening? Is this something that resonates with ACS? And similarly with Karen, with I-SLC. Is there a role for this kind of education within I-SLC? So both of you, I'd love, and then Anita is going to answer this for GoTo. Or maybe Joelle can answer.
So the answer is yes. Simple answer is yes. Years and years ago, we had a collaboration with heart and diabetes. Basically lines that, you know, it was always interesting to hear primary care say, why would I do a checkup on somebody who isn't sick? And the fact of the matter is that we all know you may be sick and you don't know it. Everybody knows a lot can change in 1 year, weight gain, hypertension, all kinds of things, right? So I was working with David Eddy at the time.
Change in a heart.
And a bunch of the epidemiologists from all three organizations got together. We were using the Archimedes model, which is, you know, pretty complex. And we showed that you could accomplish a huge amount in prevention across all three diseases if you bundled preventive efforts into single visits. And we thought this was just thrilling. We were really smart. Unfortunately, the PR people in each organization said, this is crazy. All we're doing is sort of stealing our individual visibility and lumping it all together in three organizations. And so the coalition broke. But we think this would be a very sensible thing. I mean, really sensible. Speaking for the organ. So it's the kind of thing that we would promote. And, you know, we can look back on, remember the time when we were talking about, you know, the opportunity to kill two birds with one stone with lung cancer screening. And it was interpreted as, you're not going to get lung cancer screening to go mainstream by trying to sell us that it has some other advantages. Well, now it's already demonstrated, so we have this opportunity. So I think we definitely would go for it.
So Karen, I know you're interested in getting more radiology participants at I-SLC. Maybe we should start thinking about getting some cardiologists there also.
Why not? So I just want to echo what was just said. I think it just makes sense, right? To do this as our patients. And again, I'm a big fan of CT screening because again, the best way to address metastatic disease is to never get metastatic disease, and really going from what now is the buzzword of multidisciplinary care and multidisciplinary tumor board back to just one discipline and one modality, and that's surgery, or in those that are medically inoperable, radiation therapy. That's really the goal because we know we can cure people. So when we're talking about that, and also when we're talking about just the incredible advances, knowing that, yes, we can still cure a subset of metastatic disease, it then becomes about health overall. And so if you're curing these patients with stage 3 and stage 4, albeit small, and more with stage 2, with immunotherapy and targeted therapies, there's so much hope for these patients, and they do want to continue on that health continuum that it just makes sense to me. So I do think we have to evolve as an organization, which we are trying to, and we love all the radiologists. And hey, again, anybody who's passionate, this group is so passionate about cardiac scoring, and I think it just makes sense. We're here to help patients. All right, we're here to help patients together from all disciplines, so I'm all for it.
And Joelle, we're for the GoTo perspective.
Yeah, well, I can talk from the GoTo perspective, but I really need to talk about what I tested in 2010 until 2017, because I created a model, a centralized model, and tested this using the Eggleston score because we were an I-ELCAP site at the time. And then we built a full-fledged centralized screening program and leveraged this data. The problem was it was way ahead of its time, and there wasn't a lot of support around utilizing those lung cancer screening visits to counsel people about their evidence of coronary artery disease on imaging and what to do next. But I can say over the course of 6 years of creating that model and engaging primary care providers very robustly, I really flipped the paradigm and those communication lines with those primary care providers, and they came to really count on that. I'm a certified tobacco treatment specialist. I also integrated tobacco cessation in those visits, and I also sent people for spirometry if they had evidence of air trapping on imaging and counseled the patients. I had hour-long visits, and I will say that people were much more motivated when they saw coronary artery calcium on their imaging to have that conversation and follow up with their primary care providers for risk stratification. And I was using the ASCVD scoring within my visits. I think we're in a better position now than we've ever been, and now we have more science and more tools. But you know, we've got to get out there and get more information to support this. And frankly, we just need to start doing it. I will say that primary care providers, when they saw this opportunity, they were grateful. Many of them were bought in because it opened the opportunity for them to have this conversation with their patients, which they had already been having, but this was one more thing that really supported them. From the go-to standpoint, Anita's really leading this initiative with Lori Ambrose, but I would say that, you know, we have so much information. Now we need to find a pragmatic solution to integrate this into our care delivery models, and I don't know what we're waiting for. We need to start moving forward. I think we need to test a few different models and run for it.
And by the way, now that we're curing all these lung cancers, what do you think they're going to be dying of? So anyway, I think we're over time. Thank you to all the panelists. This was a wonderful discussion. Thank you, Anita, for leading this discussion.